And hello. Welcome to this is the second session of the 31st season of the New York Review of Science Fiction Readings. And next month, I'll just do the announcements top. Next month, uh, Amy Goldschlager will host Nicole Glover. And in December, Barbara Krasnoff will host Carlos Fernandez and Claire Cooney. Help me. Claire.
Cooney. D.L. Cooney.
Oh, okay. I always think of Claire as being three names. I had her. I missed the middle one, but enough of that. This particular event has been a long time coming. There was a point where we were going to do it either for the radio for Hour of the Wolf or the NYRSF reading. Then Jason got sick. I got sick. Then we had another event that we had to put off. I don't recall why. Then we were going to do it last week, and we didn't have enough stuff. So, sorry, I'm paying attention to too many things. But finally, we are here at last. And just to take care of housekeeping, okay, Barbara, why are we doing the crawl?
Okay, sorry.
And if you read Amy's message, she said no videos coming through. That's urgent.
Okay.
So pardon us while we do this housekeeping. And yeah, we've not started setting up September. So, but let me, regardless, do you see the feed coming through?
No, I do
Go
not.
to my page on Facebook.
I know. I do not see.
Okay, I'm going off mic for a second, off camera. Oh, jeez. All over the chair. Yeah, it's going to happen. Yeah, it's going to happen because Facebook says that Be Live is going soon. So it's just a question of Facebook and YouTube getting the feed. But we are indeed live, and it's time to tell those of you who don't know Jason Erik Lundberg. That's a shame. He was cited last month. Hmm? What?
Should I bring him on?
No.
Okay.
Okay. Sure. Bring Jason on. And then I was going to read his bio. Okay. Hi, Jason.
Hi. How are you, Jim?
I am well. I'm croggled by all this. The technology's gotten a little more complicated than it needs to be, but there we
All right.
are. And I see people are posting on Facebook and stuff, so it must be doing well. So let me just read your short bio. Jason Erik Lundberg was born in New York, Brooklyn, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, good. Grew up in North Carolina and has lived in Singapore since 2007. So it is a little after 7 a.m. for Jason.
That's right.
He is the author and anthropologist of over 25 books, including A Fickle and Restless Weapon, which we'll be hearing some of today, and Most Excellent and Lamentable, Diary of One Who Disappeared, which we're going to be hearing a shorter excerpt from later on today. I said that one already. Carol the Coral. I just love that title. Strange Mammals, Embracing the Strange, The Alchemy of Happiness, Fish Eats Lion, Red Dot Irreal, and then the sixth book, Bobo and Chacha's Children book series, and the biennial Best New Singaporean Short Stories, which is an anthology series. And we'll actually get to talking a little bit about that. So I guess the first main question is, how are things in Singapore and with you?
Things with me are pretty good. Like you were saying earlier, we had to delay this a couple times, and I appreciate that that we were able to reschedule. So I went into the hospital in August. Thankfully, everything's okay. I'm fine. But things are okay here. We had a kind of a sudden rise in COVID cases here over the last few weeks.
I've been reading about that. Yeah.
Yeah, where the Delta variant finally kind of really got a hold of things here. But we've been dealing with things okay. It's going fine. So it's just early in the morning at the moment, but yeah, it's going okay.
Okay, well that is a good thing.
Yeah.
I guess the main questions that I have will involve not just what you read, but also the Singapore or Southeast Asia science fiction anthologies that you do, because I find that very interesting. And now in Brooklyn, we have a couple of Southeast Asian science fiction writers. Or no, Cassandra Caw is out of Brooklyn or New York for the time being. I think she's resettled in London or something like that. But we still have Mimi Montal and some very fine writers and people. So what goes? No, I'll save those questions for after the first reading. Is there anything that you want to tell us? Yeah, okay. First question number one: why did you move to Singapore?
Well, that's kind of a long story, but I moved in, like you said, I moved in 2007, and at that point, my former wife, she was having some medical issues, and so we were having to deal with a lot of expenses, and that was still during the Bush administration, and the expenses were piling up, and there were a few other things as well. And she is Singaporean, and so we decided after a lot of discussion that we would actually try to live here. I had never lived outside the U.S., and so it was something that was exciting for me, a little scary. But I think at that point, 2007, so I visited Singapore 2 or 3 times by that time, and really, thought the place was kind of interesting, and the food was fantastic, and so it was a really different experience from what I was used to. And so I was like, okay, well, let's give this a try. So that was the main kind of impetus for coming here.
Okay, and I assume obviously things are working out because you're still there.
Yeah, so it's been 14 years at this point. So yeah, so I'm still here. So yeah. So now I'm doing things a little bit differently. So back then I was still fairly fresh out of graduate school, and I was teaching classes, teaching English. And then here I got a job at a university for a semester, and then a full-time job at a local high school, one of our secondary schools, and taught there for 4 years before realizing that I really wasn't the way that my personal philosophy, my teaching philosophy, it was not really gelling with kind of how a lot of the Singaporean attitudes toward teaching, and especially a lot of the administrative stuff goes. So I ended up leaving that job at the end of 2011, and then got a job editing at a publishing house here. So I've been the fiction editor at Epigram Books here in Singapore for the last 9 years now. So So yeah, so it's been going pretty good. It's an interesting place to live, and I've been enjoying it so far.
Great. So, without further ado, since there was so much fumbling, checking on, we're simulcasting both to Facebook and YouTube. And there's something like a 2-minute delay from when we're actually doing this here to it's showing up on the other services.
Hmm.
And uh, that's why we had all this running around, plus my usual general discombobulation. Uh, I had you on the radio once live, right? You were in the studio.
That's right. Yeah, I was on Hour of the Wolf in 2008, in December of 2008. So, so it's been quite a while. So, yeah. So I was actually I had like I said, I'd already moved to Singapore by that point, but I flew back to the U.S. to New York City for Christmas. My sister was living there at the time. She was living in Brooklyn actually, off of Ocean Parkway, tiny apartment off of Ocean Parkway. And so I came to visit her for Christmas, and then my parents ended up driving up as well, so we got to spend the holiday together. And but yeah, during that time there was a reading that we had organized at the KGB bar for an anthology that me and my ex-wife had put out called "A Field Guide to Surreal Body." And I no
That was
longer
a
remember
wonderful
how,
evening.
but thankfully word got to you. Yeah. So thankfully word got to you about this, and you were like, "Hey, that sounds kind of cool. You want to come on the radio?" I was like, "Yeah, sure." So, so I got up. I remember getting up a lot earlier for that one as well, and coming over to the studio on off of Wall Street. So yeah, that was 2008 that I did that. So it's been a good long time since we've talked like this.
Yes. So I was still on at 5 a.m. then, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
Not.
yeah. So I remember I had to get up at 4.
You had more likely you had to be at the station at 4.
Maybe that was it. It was. I remember it was really early. So
Yeah.
yeah.
The show was 5 to 7, and they've swapped my time slot so many times. I now end where I now start where I used to end,
Right.
so that uh, I'm on Saturday mornings at 7 a.m. New York time. That might be
Right.
easier for you, but but we're not doing the show live because the space is so confined
Right.
that
Right.
uh, we just a couple of engineers and stuff like that, and otherwise we pre-produce our shows or we use special software to get in there,
Right. Yeah.
and I don't you have that ability. So right now I'm on, but I'm only 1 hour, and it's
Mm.
pre-recorded. But which means that we can probably take a portion of this and just put it on the radio next month.
That would be cool.
Yeah. Oh, and I should promote here that the next 2 episodes of Hour of the Wolf will be my interview with some guy named Frank Herbert, who I think has a movie based on some of his stuff coming out for the third time. The
Mm.
same story. Um, so enough of my discombobulation. You were going to read for us from
Yeah.
Fickle and Restless Weapon.
Yeah. Actually, before I do that, I do want to mention that
Oh, please, yeah.
the previous month's session with Michael Bishop. So
Hmm.
I did watch that and listen to it, and
Oh, good.
I appreciated that he said hi. And you mentioned in there was a thing that he and or sorry that I and his son Jamie worked on together. And I actually wanted to show you. I still have a copy. So this was
Oh,
in 2011. This was a book that I self-published, basically,
oh,
a
that's
collection
great.
of short stories. And just I put this thing together. This was before really before ebooks became kind of a big thing, and self-publishing became a big thing. So I had to like kind of do all the design myself as well, the interior kind of layout and stuff. But Jamie did all the illustrations. So he did the cover, and he did all these kind of spot illustrations that they actually look like woodcuts in here. Let me show you a good one. Yeah, so this is one of those. So I was really happy to work with him on that. He did a wonderful job on that. That was 2001, so it's quite a long time ago. It was a year before, or not, I shouldn't say a year. It was about 6 months before I went to Clarion. So none of the stories were actually published by the time I put this book together as like a Christmas present. So none of these were actually published, and then I think later, like 1 or 2 got published after that. But it was wonderful to work with him, and I still miss him a lot. So I still have 3 of his prints of 3 of his art, pieces of art that he'd done and gave to me, hanging up in my bedroom. So I still think about him a lot. So I did want to mention that, and also to say hi, Mike, and thank you for the nice
shout
mention
out
last time.
Yeah. And for those who don't know, because I don't believe we mentioned it on air when Michael was here, Jamie Bishop, of course, was the teacher who was murdered at Virginia Tech, along with 12 of his students.
I don't remember the number, but it was
Well,
yeah.
It was one of those horrid tragedies.
Yeah. And it was right after I moved here. So I moved here in April of 2007, and it happened just, I think, a few weeks after that. So yeah, it was really terrible.
Yeah, yeah, and I think about it all the time. Michael is an incredibly strong individual, giving his own personal health issues and all the problems of having to deal with losing his son in a massacre. So
yeah, but yeah, Mike and Jerry are both, they're wonderful people, and I've really appreciated kind of continuing that friendship over these years as well. So
yeah. Okay. So anything else you want to mention before you start reading?
I think, because I'm not going to read from the very beginning. There's a short prologue at the beginning of the book. It takes place in 1999, and then we jump to 2014 in chapter 1. And so I'm actually going to start with chapter 1. So I think the only thing to know is that the story takes place in an alternate world. It's very similar to our world. It's kind of there was a kind of split at one point several hundred years ago, where the country that my story takes place in, it's not Singapore, but it's a Singapore-like country. It's called Tin Hau. And so the history is different. The geography is even different. But a lot of the cultural kind of touchstones are very similar. So the way that people talk and the food and things like that are very similar to Singapore. So, and this was done originally because when I first started working on this, I was still in grad school. Actually, it was in the end of 2004, I think. Yeah, when I actually started working on this, and so it took a long time. It took a while to get a first draft written, and then after that, many revisions, and then it got published last year here in Singapore by Epigram Books. And so there's a kind of a long gestation for the project. So at that point, I didn't feel like I really could write about Singapore because I hadn't been here long enough. I didn't feel like it was my right, really, to do that. And so I have this fictional country that's based very much on Singapore, but it's not Singapore. So I can talk about things that are going on in Singapore, especially the surveillance kind of culture here. It's one of the most surveilled cities in the world, I think. And so I can talk about those things, but I can do it in a fictional way. And so it hopefully will get at the issues without some of the historical baggage that comes with actually writing about the real place. So I did want to mention that up front. This is a separate place, and also in this place, Tin Hau, where the story takes place, there are people they're called Suis, and they have special abilities. So if you think of the X-Men, basically like mutants in the X-Men, so they have different abilities that they can do. So I think that's really all I need to set it up.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
So I guess anytime you're ready. And
oh, and I did want to show, before I start reading, I did want to show the designer for the book did a really wonderful job doing putting up a map. Or this was a map that I actually designed, but she translated it into the print version here. So that's kind of what Tin Hau looks like. It's that shape and all the different neighborhoods there, which are called nagaris. That's from a Malay word. Okay, so yeah, so I'll go ahead and get started. So this is from chapter 1. And so we actually are going to start here with, there's three main protagonists in the book. And this is kind of introducing the first one of these. It was late morning when Zed arrived, incognito. The passenger train slid into the Tin Hau West station like an intruder, stealthy, quiet, a hiss and a sigh. Zed gathered his rolling suitcase from the rack above his head and departed the berth with heavy steps, leaving it empty behind him. He had been fortunate to have the cabin to himself for the final section of his journey across the Malayan Peninsula, then over the Kallang Straits and into the Republic of Tin Hau. For the 14 hours beforehand, he had suffered the presence of a Ceylonese electronics merchant who droned on and on about the latest ordinator processors and advances in mobile phone technology, and, mistaking Zed for mainland Chinese, praised the ingenuity and commitment of the PRC in their development of clean energy, and then at one point fell noisily to sleep and snored as if he had inhaled a jet engine. However, the man's raucous and oblivious presence still had not been enough of a distraction from the purpose of Zed's travel, the funeral of his older sister, Alicia. When the merchant finally disembarked at Surat Thani in Siam, Zed had collapsed into his exhaustion and slept the rest of the way to his destination, startling awake as the conductor announced the arrival into Tin Hau West Station. After enduring an insufferably long queue at the immigration lounge, during which many groups of people around him with improper documentation were turned away from the border, Zed emerged into the stifling tropical heat of his homeland with his British passport stamped, his shirt instantly soaking through with sweat. The humidity sucked at his breath and churned his stomach. For the love of the Buddha, had it been this hot when he'd left? He proceeded around clots of travelers and tourists, following the signs outside the station to connect up with the TMRT subway interchange that would carry him the rest of the way. He descended via the escalator to the concourse level, purchased a single-use pass with his credit card, stepped through the terminal, and stood in front of the glass doors for the east-west line, from one train to another. The subway train arrived after a short wait, and the doors hissed open. Zed took a seat near the front of the car and placed his suitcase in the aisle. Above the windows were strips of adverts for skin whitening cream and hair straightening shampoo, as well as signs prohibiting eating, drinking, smoking, and the possession of durians on the train cars. A poster to Zed's right displayed a stock photo of a mushroom cloud in radioactive orange, captioned with, "Pinder Haka are everywhere. Report all suspicious individuals and activity," and fine printed with, "This message brought to you by Propacorp." Zed also took note of the increased number of biomechanical skunts latched to the ceiling of the subway. Spheres of opaque glass, ever vigilant, always watching and recording, as if to punctuate the heightened security theater and fear-mongering, significantly more pronounced in the years since he had migrated abroad. The square video screens that dotted the subway car's interior amongst the advert strips all showed the same BBC breaking news report. An attack by the Range in the North American Union state of Texas, which had killed around 50 people and destroyed a number of refineries and a significant section of the Keystone Pipeline. According to the crawl, it had happened
Okay, I am terribly sorry. Almost everybody on this end has dropped out. This time, not our fault, but uh, strangely, Jason, can you hear us at all? Okay, well, he's hearing us, but we don't see or hear you in the official feed.
Ask him to.
Tell you what, log in again, log out and log in again. Okay, it says host has joined the broadcast. I assume that means you.
I guess. Say something nice and have people watching.
Okay. And again, host has joined the broadcast. Well, I'm terribly sorry to everybody about all these strange
He's back.
things. Okay, so I'm going to go away and Jason will be right back. There he is.
All right.
Okay, I'm
So-
going away now, and you should go back like
I was gonna say, where did you lose me?
a little while ago. So I would say go
Okay.
back a couple of pages.
Okay. All right. Let me start off. I'll just start off on the second page. Hopefully you guys got to that part. Okay. All right. The subway train arrived after a short wait, and the doors hissed open. Zed took a seat near the front of the car and placed his suitcase in the aisle. Above the windows were strips of adverts for skin whitening cream and hair straightening shampoo, as well as signs prohibiting eating, drinking, smoking, and the possession of durians on the train cars. A poster to Zed's right displayed a stock photo of a mushroom cloud in radioactive orange, captioned with, "Pinder Haka are everywhere. Report all suspicious individuals and activity," and fine printed with, "This message brought to you by Propacorp." Zed also took note of the increased number of biomechanical skunts latched to the ceiling of the subway car, insidious barnacles protected by spheres of opaque glass, ever vigilant, always watching and recording. As if to punctuate the heightened security theater and fear-mongering, significantly more pronounced in the years since he had migrated abroad, the square video screens that dotted the subway car's interior amongst the advert strips all showed the same BBC breaking news report. An attack by the Range in the North American Union state of Texas, which had killed around 50 people and destroyed a number of refineries and a significant section of the Keystone Pipeline. According to the crawl, it had happened only 2 hours before, while Zed was still on the passenger train. The unleashed devastation had, like all reported range incidents around the globe, come completely by surprise. The footage cut from firefighters battling the blazes and paramedics tending to the wounded, to a looped recording of the attack as it had happened, captured by a witness's iPhone. The amorphous inverted mountainous structure descending through the clouds and laying waste with green lightning, then disappearing back up into the stratosphere without a trace. The provincial governor of Mexico had swiftly pledged resources and emergency personnel. The remainder of the seats on the subway train soon filled up, with families going on a day trip down to Repose Bay, with teenagers headed to the shops in Negeri Drasalek, with tall rufous-skinned Pohonarong workers trudging to destinations of menial labor. All such normal activities, as though 4 dozen human beings had not just had their lives snuffed out on the other side of the world. Zed sighed. He looked into the faces of a people he hadn't seen in 12 years. He was surprised to discover that he had missed them so much. and saddened once again by the reason for his return. Both life and death surrounded him today. He also perversely wondered at the potential pandemonium were he to reveal his true face, as he had done ever so sneakily to the immigration officer just now. He might have been able to travel unhassled and unrecognized in some place like Johannesburg or Rio de Janeiro, or even in parts of the NAU, but not in his homeland. The doors finally closed, and the subway train advanced into Tin Hau. At Kenaway 4, an extremely pregnant woman boarded with a toddler in tow. Every seat in the train car was taken, and the woman glared around, daring everyone with her gaze. Zed was exhausted, having traveled for the past several days over the vast swaths of the Chinese mainland, then down through Vietnam, Cambodia, Siam, and Malaya. It would have been financially easy enough to hire a car and driver to bring him the whole way, to arrive in comfort and luxury. But that just wasn't his way. He had at least 15 more minutes on the TMRT, and he didn't want to spend them standing up, but none of his fellow riders were apparently going to give up their seats. So he got to his feet and motioned to the young mother, who smiled genuinely and sat on the proffered invitation to 4 inch. After she'd got situated and heaved her squirming little boy onto her lap, she unleashed an invective in Hokkien at the other passengers, all of whom averted their eyes in shame. Zed couldn't understand the exact words. His Hokkien and Teochew were rusty, and he'd always been much more proficient in English. But the meaning was clear. He sat on his suitcase and tried to balance amid the subway's vibrations. Zed disembarked at Eleanor 2. The northern escalator brought him up to street level, and after waiting for only a few minutes at the streetcar stop, its overhead awning like a turquoise question mark, the vehicle arrived with a clanging of bells. The streetcar wound through familiar thoroughfares, passing the primary schools, the recreation center, the boarded-up Workers' Party headquarters. The childhood permeated the streetcar, saturating his brain with memory. Past the Indian grocer, the Dutch chocolate shop, the British butcher, the Vietnamese cafe. Past the independent booksellers, tobacconists, tailors, luggage suppliers, liquor stores, and many, many food courts. He recognized some, the businesses that had managed to hang on despite Tin Hau's relentless march of progress. But the new shops and stalls far outnumbered these, providing a familiar but altered landscape. The past and the present overlaid in his mind's eye, a distinct disconnect between the two, an unmatched set. At Nagari Eleanor Public Housing Block 137, Zed stepped off the streetcar and approached the looming concrete building, its blueprint ubiquitous all throughout Tin Hau, as though gigantic filing cabinets had been knocked on their sides all over the entire country. In the foyer, sitting behind an enormous plywood desk, was the doorman, feet up, reading the Tin Hau People's News, the government mouthpiece. Zed cleared his throat, and the doorman pulled a corner of the broadsheet down until his left eye came into view. Yeah? Zed relaxed the part of his mind that qualified him as a Swede, and with a practiced mental click, his facial features flowed and reshaped and settled into their most familiar form. The feeling had been highly disconcerting after he discovered his ability as a teenager, as though nothing solid of him really existed, as if he were made of slow-moving tar that occasionally allowed itself to stiffen into a given form. But that had been long ago, before he had gained mastery. At the physical change, the doorman jerked his feet off the desk, but to his credit, did not fall over or even yelp in surprise. Swedes were more common every day. There were some experts who proposed that in just 1 or 2 more generations, no human being would be born without some kind of special ability. But Zed would have forgiven the doorman for losing his cool at least a little bit, as seeing a man change his face right in front of him. Zed dug his scuffed national identification card out of his pocket and flashed it at the man, who grunted. I know you, La. You staying long? No. The doorman grunted and motioned to the lift with his head. Okay, you know where, he said, and then went back to his newspaper. Zed walked to the lift lobby, rolling a suitcase behind him, his head stuffed full of cotton after the long voyage, his arms and legs abruptly heavy. He was so tired. He closed his eyes as the machinery that powered the lift in front of him hummed. Oi, superstar, welcome home! Zed turned around at the doorman's utterance and flinched as the flash from the man's mobile phone temporarily blinded him. A brief surge of anger rose up, daring him to charge back to the desk, snatch the man's phone and dash it to pieces on the tiled floor of the lobby. Or at the very least, throw the man his middle finger. But then, just as suddenly, the feeling dissipated. He'd been photographed so often by so many people over the past several years that he could make no claim to privacy anymore. Still, he'd hoped to be able to avoid the amateur paparazzi for at least a few days, until after the memorial service. He sighed. Too much to hope for. The man was probably already uploading the photo to FriendFace or Instagram, even as Zed stood there. The door soon parted, and he stepped inside, pressed the button for 7. The lift hurtled upward, and then dinged open at the 7th floor. The corridor was more run down than the last time he'd been here. More dirt and scum on the walls, a darker gray cast to the concrete. In one of the neighboring flats, a Tamil soapy was cranked to full volume, and the melodramatic dialogue echoed in the corridor. At the 3rd door on the right, he took a deep breath and knocked. After a few moments, the door opened. A large Pohonarong woman stood there, mop in hand. At over 2 meters tall, she filled the entire frame, and her dark reddish-brown skin, coarse all over as if she were an ancient oak tree come to life, was shiny from work. Her deep green eyes glistened, and the corners of her mouth pulled upwards slightly, the kind face and the looming presence of his early years. Then a middle-aged Chinese woman in a flower print dress appeared from behind and elbowed the Pohonarong maid out of the way. The woman's straight dark hair was cut short and above, cinched her sharp cheekbones, and her eyes were rimmed with red, her smile bittersweet. As the maid turned to go back into the flat, the Chinese woman pulled Zed forward into a rib-crushing hug that expelled the air from his lungs. After a long moment, she released him and looked at his face, her eyes blinking quickly. Sayang, sayang, she said. I thought you were coming tomorrow. I was going to ask R to fetch you from the station. Hello, Ma. It's good you come home, Sayang. We can put your sister to rest now. I'm going to stop right there.
So thank you. That was a lovely piece. We were, but more technical problems, interruptions. This time, not our fault. We just, everybody, you, Barbara, Amy, and I were all thrown off the system, and we had to bring them back up one at a time. Hopefully, we can fix up that reading in post, as they say. Although I'm a great
Okay.
audio editor, not as good a video editor, but I'm learning.
Okay.
So I love the world building there. That's a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, we should mention, by the way, main thing that Amy is standing by for is for the viewers to ask any questions, assuming that you're watching this live and not from the archive. So you can just go straight into the comments area or the chat area, depending whether you're on Facebook or YouTube, and Amy will help select some of the questions that we will get to. How long did it take you to do the world building there and the whole piece? And did you have a writers group to work with or anything like that?
I think it took me at that point, before I started actually doing any writing, it took me about a year to kind of put the world building together. So like I said, I had visited Singapore a few times. Well, actually, no, I'm sorry, that was 2004. So I'd only visited maybe once or twice at that point. And so, so when I was actually doing a lot of research and trying to put the world together, because this is a fictional place, it took me a while, and it took me a good number of hours to come up with all the neighborhood names, to come up with kind of what the country looked like and how everything kind of related to each other, and where the capital was, all that kind of stuff. And then also to plug in what I knew about Singapore's kind of cultural details into that as well, and to think about, because this is a fictional version of Singapore, it's not Singapore, just to think about, okay, well, what's going to be different? How is it going to diverge from the real Singapore, so that I can, just for the purposes of the story. So yeah, but it took me about a year of doing that before I actually started writing the first draft of it. And at that point, I don't think, I'm trying to remember now, but I don't think I had a writer's group at that point. But because I was in graduate school, I was able to workshop certain bits, so like, especially the first chapter, the first couple chapters, I think. There was a novel writing workshop that I took in graduate school, led by Wilton Barnhart, who's a wonderful novelist himself. And it really helped. It really helped me to kind of focus in on, okay, what's the story I really want to tell here, and how do I want to do it? So, but yeah, that's how that works.
Very cool. Do you use any software for making notes, index cards? What's your what's the word I'm looking for? Your regime.
Well, I actually didn't then, but I do now. So, so now I use Scrivener, which is a wonderful program that I've been using it since about 2007, 2008. And it's really fantastic and they're not paying me anything, but I really love that. So I tend to evangelize about them when asked, but it's really good for long form writing, because you can separate chapters. You can even separate scenes if you wanted to, all into separate files in Scrivener. And then when you're done, you can just compile it all together, and it'll pop it out as one like Word doc. And so, so that's what I use. And it makes it also really easy to move things around. So if you need to push one scene from the later on, push it earlier, things like that, it's super easy to do. So, so I've used that for a number of years now for when I was fine tuning the book. So when I first started, I think I was just using Word or maybe Pages, the Apple word processing program. I was just using one of those, but as it was getting longer and longer, it was getting a bit more unwieldy to actually work with. And so I got Scrivener at that point, and it really helped. So I use that for this. I use it for really all of the books that I've done since then. So Diary of One Who Disappeared, which is the novella that you mentioned. Also, and that one's because it's epistolary. It has a lot of different parts to it. So those were all in separate files there. And then my best of collection that came out in 2019 is most Lamentable. I was able to do that as well, to kind of order the stories how I wanted to. And it's also helped when I've done anthology editing, because a lot of that, once you got kind of the final stories, like the final list of works that you want to publish in the anthology, ordering them is also very important. And so I tend to think in terms of symmetrics that I like to, and actually in terms of palindromes as well. So I like to have the rhythm of a book actually be fairly equal, and so kind of moving toward the center from both sides. And so like the long stories tend to be in the same place and in the opposite points of the book. And I want to have a strong story starting the book and a strong story ending the book. And again, Scrivener's been really, really good for that too. So so that's what I tend to use for the longer stuff. If it's just a short story, I'll use Word or something like that. But Scrivener was really handy for using for writing a book. Yeah.
And what's your process on the anthologies?
It depends. So there is, like you mentioned in the intro, there is a biennial anthology series that I am the series editor for, called Best New Singaporean Short Stories, and I've been doing that since 2013, I think. So we've got volume 5 is actually coming out, actually just in a few weeks. It's almost out. So we have a guest editor who's the main person putting those books together, and I'm the series editor, just making sure that everything is kind of consistent across the series as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
And also,
do you get to choose the guest editor?
I do. Yeah. Well, it's usually in conversation with my publisher.
Okay.
So we talk about who would be a good guest editor to hire, not to hire, but to commission, I guess, to do this. And then hopefully they say yes. So so sometimes it's a matter of the person that I want to do it isn't able to, or just doesn't want to, and that's fine. So I have to come up with a list of names. And so I usually have kind of the order of preference, and start at the top and then work my way down. But we get to choose a guest editor for that. Yeah, but then they are the ones who actually choose the stories, and then I work with them to order the stories, and to make sure that they, again, like with anthologies that I would edit myself, to make sure that it's balanced and everything like that.
Cool. So do you want to read from Diary now? Is this a good time?
I can. Yeah, it's up to you. Your show.
Yeah. Well, we may have lost some people. I'm not sure during our outage, so I don't see a whole lot of questions. I've been seeing people saying, "Oop, lost the picture," and stuff like that. But people, please don't forget to. As Amy's been putting into the chat channel, and we've been scrolling on the screen, go into the comments area and ask questions.
Yeah, I'm very happy to answer questions. So.
Okay. Any thing you want to tell us about Diary before we go there?
Okay, yeah. So Diary of One Who Disappeared. It's a novella that I wrote. I'm trying to remember when. I think it was 2013, 2014, around then. And it actually takes place in the same world as the book that I just read from. It takes place in Tin Hau again. It takes place 25 years after A Fickle and Restless Weapon. And so there's a big gap of time in there where we jump from one to the other. And so the bit I'm going to read from is doesn't have any spoilers in it. So, there are things that happen throughout the novel, throughout The Fickle and Restless Weapon, which are very dramatic and kind of change a lot of what's going on in the society, and kind of change the kind of the future of Tin Hau. And then there's a 25-year gap, and then we come in with a new character who's actually, he's American. He's from New York. And he's working at that point, it's still called the North American Union. So this was another thing that I put in there that was actually based on a conspiracy theory that I read, that one day the US and Canada and Mexico would all be one just giant country called the North American Union. And I thought, that's a cool idea, so I'm going to do that. So for various reasons, and one of the big reasons was, as I mentioned in the reading that I did, was the range. So the range is kind of this, it looks like this kind of upside down mountain range, basically. And every so often it'll kind of float down out of the clouds and just lay waste to an area, and then go back up into the clouds and disappear. And so this was kind of my exploration of basically the war on terror in the US post 9/11. And so because of that, because it has kind of devastated the US in the book anyway, after 1999, the kind of, a lot of things have happened to kind of shift society. So it's gone into a very far right theocracy, basically, and a lot of people are oppressed. The Swedes that I mentioned, the Swedes that are in the North American Union are actually kept in camps, and so there's a lot that's gone on in that place in that time. But this one guy, Lucas, he works for the Department of Economic Spiritual in the NAU in New York City, and he's heard about Tin Hau. So in these 25 years, he's heard about Tin Hau, he's read about Tin Hau, and they have actually done well in terms of the way that their country has gone. And he wants to kind of take inspiration from that and almost really form an alliance with Tin Hau, so that maybe the NAU can get back up on its feet, because they've been kind of kept at a certain technological level, yeah, for quite a while. They're kind of stuck. And so he wants that to kind of jumpstart what's going on in the NAU and hopefully improve things. And also improve things for people, including the Swedes in the NAU as well. So he takes a voyage to Tenhou and on an airship for various reasons. But he takes a voyage on an airship to get, and when he lands, he's going to meet with a government functionary about possibly forming this alliance with them. But there's a day where he has a little free time, and he decides that he wants to be a bit of a tourist. And so what I'm going to read from is actually on page 50, so it's a little bit into the book at this point. So he's been there for a little bit, and now he's going to be basically be a tourist for the day. Okay, so he's okay, and also he's called for a taxi. And he goes out of his hotel. He's called for a taxi and asks the taxi driver, "Will be some cool places to go." This is where we start. "You like books?" I said that I did. I caught the driver's glance in the rearview mirror and the crinkling of his eyes as he smiled. "I have just the place for you, boss. Laurent Buku. Some wonderful bookshops there. Come, I take you." The taxi finally glided forward, and the cabbie switched on the fare meter. We passed out of the main downtown area and onto an expressway. I was suddenly aware of what sounded like musical notes coming from the body of the taxi itself. After I asked if something was wrong with the cab, he revealed that it was actually the road that was singing. That the government had installed patterns of tiny bumps on the expressways that would resonate when cars rolled over them. Excuse me. Producing a song. We then passed into the mouth of a massive tunnel, 5 lanes across, the light dimming from sunlight to fluorescent strips. Tubular fans rotated lazily, attached parallel to the tunnel's ceiling. We had entered the tunnel from full tropical sunshine, but emerged on the other end, just a few minutes later, into a thunderstorm so powerful as to rattle the teeth. The transition was sudden and unnerving. "Where are you from, boss?" the cabbie asked, as fat raindrops streaked down the windows. After I told him, he mentioned that he was a collector of thank you notes. I had no idea what that meant, so he leaned over without slowing the taxi and popped open the glove compartment to pull out a thick scrapbook, which he then passed to me. Inside were pasted page after page of index cards, on which simple thank you messages were written, many of them not even in English. These were labeled by language in neat pencil. When I pointed this out, he said, "Yes, that's right. I now have thank you in 137 languages and counting. Every card is from a passenger who rode in my cab. 8 years I've been doing this." I turned the pages, chagrined to realize that he'd been collecting his thank you notes as long as I'd been married. They were all addressed to Iskander, which I could only conclude was the cabbie's name. The expected European languages were there, as well as Arabic, Bahasa Malayu, and a number of Chinese dialects. But these quickly transitioned to entries I would not have expected: Hungarian, Farsi, Icelandic, Afrikaans, even Cherokee. "Yes, a very nice young man from North Carolina," he said with a grin, and pulled an empty index card and ballpoint pen from a pocket on the card door, and handed them back to me. "Would you mind, boss?" Using the scrapbook as a hard surface, I wrote, "Dear Iskander, it was great to meet you in Tenhou. Thank you for telling me about your wonderful collection. Please don't ever stop. All the best, Lucas Lehrer," and in parentheses, NAU. After signing my name with a flourish, I passed the card, pen, and scrapbook back to him, and he said, "Lovely, lovely, thank you so much. You know, it's so important to have a physical copy of these things. It's just too easy for digital files to poof! Gone forever, but paper I can hold in my hand. Only way it goes poof is if I do something stupid and misplace it." "I know what you mean," I told him. "I write in a paper diary." Good for you. See, you know." Physical diary, physical index cards. They feel more real than ones and zeros in an ordinator. Correct or not? We're beings with many senses, and touch is an important one. Something is lost to us when it becomes virtual. I nodded, and Iskander chuckled to himself. The rest of the drive was spent in contemplative silence. The rain eased, then abruptly stopped. Tin Hau rolled by my windows, shiny from the raindrops, and I became hopelessly lost. I've always been bad with directions, but it was especially disorienting in an unfamiliar country. However, I trusted Iskander to get me to my destination, which he did after only 10 more minutes, a cozy bookshop called Epigram Books. The store was devoted to literary fiction and printed editions, and no disposable fare here, like at the stall I visited a few days ago, but lovingly crafted works of art. Artisanal bookmaking, the likes of which I've not seen back home. The shop itself was thronged with customers. I took my time, losing myself in the sights and smells of that wondrous place. Many times tipping titles off the shelves so that I could flip through the pages and stroke the bindings. I found a copy of America by Franz Kafka, identical to the one in my hotel room, and I'm still amazed that someone could leave behind such a well-made and expensive book. As me. I was extremely tempted by a slip-cased hardcover copy of The Man in the High Castle, liberally illustrated by Salvador Dali, but the price was more than 3 times the spending money that I brought with me, so I reluctantly returned it to the shelf. One entire wall was devoted to Tin Hauan literature, written by authors with Chinese, Malayan, and Indian surnames, with the odd Western name thrown in, presumably migrants who had made Tin Hau their home. Novel, short fiction, poetry, stage plays, literary journals, all evidence of a vibrant and vital literary culture. I spent nearly 2 hours in that place, better than any museum tour I could have imagined, and ended up buying an anthology called Blessed Travels, the best new writing from Tin Hau, signed by the editor. It cost more than I was intending to spend, but it looked fascinating and would make a great keepsake. Excuse me again. At the counter, a hunched-over Chinese man, somewhere in his early 60s, most likely the owner, rang up the sale, and in a thick accent asked what country I was from. After I told him, he said, my parents bring me there when I was just a boy. Went to Mall of America. You ever been to Mall of America? I admitted that I never had. I didn't have the heart to tell him how it had been split into many smaller shopping centers long ago, only 2 of which even still exist anymore. So many shops. No need to go anywhere else. He laughed, the action triggering a series of dry coughs. When he spoke again, his face was more grave. Such a shame what happened over there. So much tragedy. So sad. I accepted his condolences, assuming he was talking about the range, but didn't know what else to say. He handed me my change and placed the anthology in a brown paper bag. Some great writers in here, he said. Even a Pulitzer winner. We were all very proud when she won. Okay, I'll stop right there.
Okay, and something that happens to me so rarely is that I was muted. So this is also still in print, right?
It is, yes, yes. It just came out in 2019, the novella did, yeah.
Okay. And
I should say, too, that unfortunately, both of these books, and really most of my books, in paperback are not really available outside of Singapore, but the ebooks are. So you can find the ebooks to these like basically anywhere that sells ebooks. Yeah.
okay, that's good. But
Yeah.
hard copy, somebody would have
Hard
to.
copy a little harder to come by. You can always contact me, email me, and see if we can work something out. If anybody's watching and wants to do that. But yeah, if you're outside of Singapore, probably the ebook is your best option.
Yeah. I noted a fair amount of what seemed like autobiography in that story.
Hmm.
The person writing the best of this, and I love, by the
Yeah.
way, the reference when you were talking about the world building and Canada, the U.S., and Mexico having come up. For some reason, I thought of The Man in the High Castle, and
Yeah.
then you cited it,
Hmm.
which was great.
Yeah, and I actually mentioned two books there that were influential on writing the novella, and that was one of them, Man in the High Castle, and America by Kafka was the other one. So, so I wanted to kind of give them some give their acknowledge them in that section.
Okay, so we do have a question from James Anthony Phillips, and he's asking, "Is your title influenced by the name of the Leos Janáček opera?"
Yeah,
Leos, am I pronouncing that? I know the Janáček is right.
yeah. It is, yes. Thank you, James, for asking that. Yeah, it is. It is. So there were a few things that, in terms of the title, there was two things. It was that opera. It's like a song cycle
Yeah,
that Janacek did. He's a Czech composer, and so
I'm a
that,
big fan
and
of The
also
Cunning Little Vixen, which is a Janáček opera, and there's actually
okay.
there's an
So it was
animated
that,
version.
right? Oh, no kidding. Okay, okay, I'll have to check that out then. So yeah, so it was the title of that song cycle, that opera, and also the subtitle for America by Kafka, which is The Man Who Disappeared. So it was the kind of the combination of both of those things that led to the title for this book. And like I mentioned before, it's epistolary. So the part that I just read from was from, excuse me, was from Lucas's diary. But there are diary entries. There are communiques to his department back in the NAU. There are other kinds of like text messages. There are all kinds of stuff in the book that give you the idea of the story. So the bit that I read from was from his actual diary. So and that had always been the case. And so I always in a way, because just one of my kind of formative texts, I guess, especially when I was in high school, was Dracula, which is told in epistolary, is told through letters. And so I wanted to do something like that. I had never written something, especially this long, that told it in this format. So I wanted to try that. So I knew it was going to have diary entries in it. And then once I knew that, it was really a nice bit of synchronicity to come across. I mean, I knew America already. I had already read the Kafka book, but to come across the Janáček opera as well, that it had a similar name too, and also some of the storyline in that opera as well influenced a bit of how I moved the story in the novella as well.
So you have a Czech writer, Czech opera, Czech composer anyway,
Yeah, yeah.
and but I guess the Man in the High Castle doesn't quite count for
Yeah,
being
not
Czech
in
at
terms of the
all.
checks, but yeah, it's
Yeah,
but it was another very influential thing on me. Yeah,
yeah.
that's probably my favorite Philip K. Dick novel, and it was. I actually came to it fairly late. I was reading Dick when I was an undergraduate, so this was in the kind of mid to late '90s, um, and so I came to the Man in the High Castle much later, probably about 10 years after that. But it kind of, and I had heard about it before that, but I was a bit intimidated for a while, and I also too, when something is really hyped up or really venerated, um, excuse me,
Bless you.
I tend to have the opposite reaction where it's like it's almost that thing that's like, okay, everyone likes it, so it's not cool now. It's almost that thing, which I really have tried not to do as much of in later years. But that was the case there, and so it had been talked about for a long time. I'd been aware of it for a long time before that, but then I was like, you know what? Damn it, I'm going to read this book. And so I did, and it was just fantastic. It just really blew me away.
Yeah. Did you watch any of the TV series?
No, I wasn't able to. No, because I think that's on Amazon, right?
Yes, it is. It's on
So
Prime.
yeah. So I don't have Amazon Prime, so no, I wasn't able to watch it. I just see some clips from it, which it looks very interesting.
It was very interesting. It's very, very different.
That's what I
And
heard. Yeah.
out of the four um, seasons they had, I stopped watching after season 3 because
Okay.
they did what seems to be becoming fashionable now, killing off lead characters.
Oh, okay, man.
And I can't say more than that because that would be a spoiler for
Yeah,
something big
yeah,
that's out there now.
yeah.
But and at that point, I didn't want to watch more of it. It was getting, it no longer had any Philip K. Dick left in it. But it started out
Okay.
with at least the right characters in a
Mhm.
different situation.
Right, right.
And of course, you couldn't have this book that people were passing around, The Grasshopper Lies Heavy. Instead,
Yeah.
you had a movie,
Okay. Oh,
and,
okay. Okay.
and different people are collecting fragments.
Mm.
And the man in the high castle in Colorado, I believe, what he's doing is he's compiling them to make the entire
Ah, okay.
film. But
Okay. Okay.
that's all said and done by the second season,
Mhm.
and the fourth season, which I have not watched, are people going to that other world.
Oh, wow. So they actually passed over to I guess the real world.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
do that a little bit in season 3, and that's most of
Mm.
what season
Wow.
4, that and killing a few Nazis, uh,
Right. Which is
in
always good to watch.
I imagine so. Um, what is media life like where you are? I know so little about Singapore. I think
Okay.
it's a terrible thing to say that the majority of what I know about Singapore is from having watched Crazy Rich Asians.
Which is not. It's just that should not be your reference point for Singapore.
Even
So
while
that's
watching it, I knew that.
yeah.
It's like, yeah, you learn about a building there.
Yeah, well, it's also just a very very narrow slice of kind of the experience of people here.
Yeah, it's one of those things where
It's for super ultra rich.
there's
Most of Singapore is not like that. So yeah, yeah,
yeah, and
yeah. So yeah. So in terms of media, for a long time, like when I first got here, so back in 2007, 2008, most of the media seemed to be American media, which was really interesting. So there were things that were being played here that were like a couple of years, like 2 or 3 years actually behind when they had first aired in the U.S. Um, and this was kind of an interesting switch that when I've talked to friends about this when they were growing up, about my same age, when they were growing up, it was much more British media. So it was a lot of shows from the BBC and a lot of shows from Channel 4 and stuff like that
mhm.
out of the UK. And then at some point there was a switch, and so a lot of the stuff that comes here now, at least on TV, is from the US. I haven't had cable in a long time, so I'm not aware of what's being broadcast now. But it seems to be mostly a lot of the kind of cultural imports come from the U.S. So TV, movies, especially. Um, in terms of streaming, Disney Plus just arrived here I think in March or something like that. It was after a long wait, so it had been out in the U.S. and like several countries for a while, and then it finally came here. But Netflix is here, and so it's yeah. So there's kind of a diverse range of things that you can see. But even before I moved into the flat that I'm in now, so I moved. It was about almost 5 years ago, and even then, when I was still in the old place, I had decided to cut the cable because it really wasn't. I really wasn't enjoying it that much anymore, and I was really wasn't getting as much out of it. So I ended up cutting that. So now it's basically anything that I can stream. So yeah, yeah.
Yeah, you can always get yourself a dongle like a Roku or Chromecast
Yeah,
or something
yeah, I
like that.
could, I could, but it's still. I'm a lot of the stuff too is like the main network stations here. They actually have live feeds on YouTube, So you can actually watch. You can basically watch those those channels on YouTube as well. So it's not as necessary to really have that anymore.
Okay, fair enough. Um, what of your work would you like to see adapted?
Sorry, what am I work? What?
Would you like to see adapted, turned into a streaming series or a movie or a
Oh.
play or radio drama? Uh,
Yeah. um, that's a good question. There are several. Like, if it was going to be like a series, then I would probably want to have something that's kind of meaty, like like the novel, because it's a big one. Um, and there's a lot of story there. I would hope that there would be something. There would be enough there that you could tell an entire story like that over like several episodes. But
mhm.
no one's necessarily knocking on my door right now for that. So it's always kind of wouldn't it be nice if, but I'm not holding my breath. But there is a Netflix presence here in terms of the company itself, and they do have some adaptation stuff that's going on for some Singaporean content. So some stuff that's based on books that have been written here. They've got some things in the works, I think. So yeah. So who knows? Who knows?
Yeah, one of the best things about Netflix reaching the world is that most other countries have a rule that if you're going to stream to us, you have to use some of our content.
Right.
And I
Right.
love
And I
that
was
because that way I get to
yeah.
see that foreign content.
Yeah, there were some series, actually some TV series that were made here I think in the 90s. That at one point, it was earlier this year, there was just a whole dump of them on Netflix, like multiple series that were on there. So it was really cool because I wasn't here then, so it was really cool to see these TV shows that were actually being made here during that time.
Cool. What are you working on now?
I'm working. Well, I have a multitude of projects, but the one that I'm kind of focusing on a bit more now is another novel. It's actually a sequel to this, so it takes place about 5 years after the events of Diary. Um, and I've been working on it for a while, but unfortunately the pandemic really just kind of killed most of my creative energy
Hmm.
for the last 19 months or so, 19 20 months or so. So it was something that I had hoped to get done by this point, but I'm still only probably a few chapters into it. So unfortunately, the kind of progress on that has slowed down. Um, but that is still the thing that I'm trying to get out next. And if I can keep the title, what I'd like to call is 1986. So it's a response both to 1984 by Orwell, which is my favorite novel, and then also 1985 by Anthony Burgess, which is kind of an uh, it's more of a
It's a quasi essay.
it is. It's kind of a left leaning, not a left leaning. I shouldn't say. It's a criticism of the left as another kind of dystopia as well, which was it's an interesting book. I don't really like, agree with a lot of all the conclusions that Burgess came to in that book, but yeah, that one is definitely more of a. It feels like more of a thought essay than like 1984, which was a proper novel. But so it's kind of a in conversation with those two stories. So it takes place after after Diary has ended. I'm not going to go into details because it'll spoil it, but there's a big thing that happens, and the country kind of goes back into a kind of I guess you could call it a dystopia, but it's more of an apartheid state. So it's kind of starting from that point, and seeing kind of where it leads me. And the thing that I've tried to do as well with these Tin Hau pieces, the novel and novella, is not to make it a series, because it's like over the years I've really come to the conclusion that conclusion, but to my preference, I guess that it's very hard for me to start a new series because you're committing to multiple books. And if you read the first one and you don't like it, then that's kind of it. So the way that I'm going about writing these books about Tin Hau, so the A Fickle and Restless Weapon and Diary One Who Disappeared, and then hopefully this new one, 1986, is to tell them as self-contained stories. So they're kind of complete unto themselves, but they share a world, they share a timeline, and there are characters that will come back. So characters that you've read about in the novel will come back in as a supporting role, maybe, or even a cameo, I guess, in the novella and in the new book as well. So you don't have to have read the prior books in order to get something out of the book that you're reading. So I like doing it that way because it invites more readers in, so they can take any entry point into these books. If you read them in chronological order, then you'll get more out of it. You'll get more Easter eggs and more things out of it, but it's not going to prevent you from enjoying the reading experience if you haven't read those.
Fair enough. Well, I think that we may have lost a couple of people, at least, who might otherwise be asking questions, and they'll be seeing this on the archive. But
Mm,
I don't know that there's really too much in the way of audience questions as a result
mm,
yet. We'll probably see them in email or in the chat channels within Facebook.
yeah. And I
So,
can also I'll check on Facebook too after this is posted, and after this is kind of available in archived form. I'll check there, and if anybody has questions there, I can always answer them there.
yeah. And oh, yes. And Amy points out there's also IQ 84
Yeah, one
by
Q84. Yeah,
Haruki Murakami. I've never had to say his
yeah,
name before.
yeah. Which is also that's a very strange book. It's one
Highly
that it's not.
regarded, though.
It is. It's not my favorite Murakami book. That one is Hard Boiled Wonderland and the End of the World. That was a fantastic book.
Ooh, I
So
don't know that.
one Q84 is there were like the middle part of it. It really slows down in the middle part of it, and he almost lost me. It's a long book. It was written in 3 sections, but then it really picks up again in the 3rd section again. So, but yeah, that's an interesting one as well.
Okay, excellent. So we're going to have to do not only do this again. We're going to do at least that first part, the reading from Fickle, for the radio,
Okay, great,
so we can see what kind of repairs we can
right.
make out of our slow start on our technical end, and then the
Mm,
one that from our host provider uh, knocked all the participants off one by one,
yeah.
starting with you.
Yeah. Yeah, I kept reading. I saw that like my video had disappeared, but the book cover was still there. So I kept going. I was like, okay, maybe we just lost the video. So I just kept going. But yeah, it lost me for a few minutes there.
Yeah. Um yeah, there was a notification host chat, but it's sort of hard to
Mm,
be looking at that and reading and all the rest of it.
right.
But thanks so much. It's been too long. Are you ever going to come back to New York?
I want to. There was something I was. Yeah, I keep getting like on Facebook. They have like the reminders of what happened 1 year ago, 2 years ago, that kind of
Yeah.
thing. And it came up recently that the last time I was there was 2014. So I got invited to come for the Singapore Literature Festival in New York City, which is organized by Ji Leong Ko. He's a poet and a teacher. And so he brought in a lot of Singaporean writers living in the US, and then he brought in some of us from Singapore to the US. Actually, I might have been the only one, which was interesting because there were Singaporean writers already in the US, and then I was an American writer in Singapore that was brought back to the US. So it was kind of funny how that worked out. But yeah, so last time I was there was 2014 for that festival. It was around this time of year. It was around October, and I got to see a lot of great friends while I was there and participate in the different panels on the festival, and again, hit up a bunch of bookshops as well while I was there. But that was really the last time. At that point, I stayed with my sister again. She was living in Washington Heights at that point, and so it was a wonderful visit. I really enjoyed it, and I want to come back. That was like 7 years ago. I want to come back at some point, but
Yeah.
it's just been very difficult. I'm hoping I'm crossing fingers. I'm really hoping that I might be able to come back, not to New York, but just to the U.S. To visit family for Christmas this year, because there's been just recently, like in the last few days, it was announced by the government here that they're opening up I think it's called a vaccination travel lane or vaccinated travel lane between New York and the U.S., which means that if you travel from the U.S. into Singapore, you don't have to go into 2 weeks of quarantine if you're vaccinated and if you've done the PCR test like before the flight, and then once you get back and you're negative. So that would be great if I'm able to come back for Christmas. So it's still a little bit up in the air, but I'm really hoping to do that.
Yeah, well, if it
But New York
happens,
I mean, it's the city of my birth. Yeah. So I really hope to make it back to New York someday.
if we're lucky,
Yeah.
we'll have a studio, or
Hmm.
if we're assuming we're all vaxxed, we can,
Right.
record staring at each other. And otherwise, we'll do another session like this. And just to repeat the piece from Fickle and Restless Weapon.
Yeah. So it's been a real pleasure, Jim, and I really appreciate you doing this. So the book came out last year. It was kind of a victim of the pandemic. So it came out and it hasn't really done that well. And so I really appreciate being able to come on and read from it and talk about it.
Yeah, well, we'll call this the not relaunch, but an anniversary launch. How's
The
that?
anniversary launch. Okay.
Something along those lines.
Yeah.
And your website is located where?
Yeah.
Tell people.
It's jasonlundberg.wordpress.com.
Okay.
So that's it. Or you can just Google my name. If you just Google my name, it'll pop
Yeah,
up.
actually, it's very easy to find
Yeah.
through Google. That
Yeah.
will bring you up.
So, and I'm
Okay,
on Facebook and Instagram and some other places too. So
fair enough. Not doing recipes on TikTok though.
no, I'm not.
Good for
I got
you.
a little bit old for TikTok. So I just turned 46. Actually, just about a week and a half ago, I just turned 46. So I'm really not in TikTok's demographic. So
Yeah, it's just it seems to be the new place where people go for recipes.
okay,
And,
I
those
didn't
are
even know that.
adults doing them. Yeah.
I knew for excuse me. I knew for like short videos like dancing and stuff like that, and I've seen it for that. I haven't seen it. I didn't realize it was for recipes too. That's interesting.
Yeah. Well, I just use the internet and YouTube
Hmm.
for recipe things. Anyhow, again, thank you so much.
Thank you,
And
Jim.
uh, everybody will be back on November 2nd, I believe it is, with Amy Goldschlager interviewing uh, Nicole Glover, whose second book in her Underground Railroad series, which is basically the Underground Railroad with magic. It's a wonderful series, and her new book is just coming out. And then in December, Barbara will be hosting uh, Claire Cooney and Carlos Hernandez. And if it's true that things are getting manageable, I'm a little bit wary of that. We may be able to do it live in our at the Brooklyn Commons, which is our regular home, and otherwise we'll be here on Facebook and YouTube. So thanks again, and good morning to you and
Thank you.
any of your friends in Singapore that may be uh, watching from there, and good evening to the U.S. people.